Kindness Saved a Billionaire. Chapter 1. The Thirsty Gesture. They thought Marcus Brooks was just another man pushing his cleaning cart until he paused with his last bottle of water and changed a billionaire's destiny. The sun hung low over Detroit's Woodward Avenue, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks. Marcus had been making his rounds outside the old corner store, wiping down the bench where tired commuters rested. His back ached. His shirt clung to him with sweat, and his last sip of water had gone long ago. He saw the stranger stumble, collapsing to one knee. Without hesitation, Marcus yanked open the cooler on his cart and offered the only full bottle he had left. "Here," Marcus said, voice rough but steady. "Take this before you pass out." The stranger's hand trembled as he reached for the plastic. His eyes were glassy, but when they focused on Marcus, a flicker of something unspoken passed between them. Marcus watched him drink, the water sliding down like a promise. He didn't know the man had millions stored in faraway vaults, or that his every move was tracked by personal assistants and security teams. All Marcus saw was a human being in need. By dusk, word had spread through Marcus's tight-knit neighborhood in Detroit's North End that the cleaning man had saved someone important. Some neighbors scoffed, said he was fishing for praise. Others whispered that kindness in their world always carried a price. Marcus went home to his small apartment above the laundromat, guilt gnawing at him. He thought of his mother, long gone, whose voice still echoed in his head. Help someone without expecting anything back. He breathed deep, letting the memory settle the knot in his chest. 2 days later, Marcus found a handwritten note slipped under his door. The paper was thick, embossed with an elegant monogram, E.W. His heart thudded as he unfolded it. Inside, in neat cursive, the stranger, Elijah Washington, thanked him for the glass of water. He invited Marcus to an interview at his community center downtown. Marcus stared at the note as if it might dissolve in his hand. At dawn, Marcus stood before the sleek glass doors of the Washington Community Fund, his cleaning uniform pressed and hair neatly combed. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and ambition. He watched young men and women, some wearing suits, others jeans, chat with volunteers over coffee. Marcus's palms sweated. He'd never been inside a place like this, where hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants could shift the fate of entire blocks. Elijah Washington appeared at the head of a long table, leaning forward with a quiet energy. His tailored suit contrasted with the casual sneakers he wore. He nodded at Marcus. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice calm and deep. "I heard you helped me when I was weak. I want to offer you an internship, paid, full-time. I want you to help me decide which neighborhoods need our next project." Marcus accepted the folder Elijah handed him, his mind spinning between surprise and disbelief. He remembered the whispers. Don't expect freebies. Yet here it was, an offer that could lift his mother's memory from sorrow to pride. He managed a nod. "Thank you, sir." As Marcus left the building, the sky had brightened and the pavement looked new. For the first time in his life, he felt hope weaving through his fears. He pictured his mother smiling at him from a better place. In that moment, he understood that the smallest drop of kindness, his last bottle of water, could ripple outward and reshape lives, including his own. Later that evening, Marcus sat on the stoop outside his apartment, reading Elijah's letter again by the flickering streetlight. He thought about the market where he'd grown up, the family who owned the corner store, and the faces of neighbors struggling to keep their homes. His chest tightened with purpose. He realized that this opportunity was not charity, it was a calling. He saw that the same generosity that lifted Elijah could lift an entire community. A soft breeze carried the distant hum of traffic and laughter from passing cars. Marcus closed his eyes, recalling the thirst that had driven him to share his water. Now he felt a different thirst, a hunger for change, for justice, for stories told in streets where hope had once been scarce. He clutched the letter like a talisman, promising himself that he would honor the faith the billionaire had placed in him. In the quiet that followed, a child's voice drifted from across the street. A little girl held out a paper cup filled with warm lemonade, offering it to a weary elderly man. Marcus watched them both, and a slow smile spread across his face. He understood that the true power of a single drop lay not in grand gestures, but in endless echoes of compassion. And as Detroit's lights flickered on, he felt ready to step into a new world, one shaped by small mercies and the promise of transformation. Chapter 2: Seeds of Doubt. Marcus woke before dawn the next morning, the note from Elijah Washington still folded neatly on his bedside table. The room was dim, lit only by the street lamp's glow filtering through the dusty blinds. He traced the embossed letters with his finger, remembering how steady Elijah's voice had been when he offered the internship. Pride and fear tangled in his chest like two old friends arguing at a family reunion. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake his neighbor upstairs, and stepped into the cool morning air. The city was still half asleep, its broken sidewalks and shuttered storefronts holding their breath. By the time Marcus reached the corner market, rumors had already spread like wildfire. Mrs. Jenkins, whose daughter worked at the hair salon down the street, shook her head as he passed. She muttered that Marcus was out for attention, that he was playing at something he could never understand. A group of older men, veterans from the community center, eyed him skeptically. One spat on the pavement and muttered, "You think that rich man gonna save you? Or is he just scheming?" The word stung, but Marcus forced a polite nod and kept walking. Inside the market, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and every pair of eyes seemed to turn toward him. He grabbed a carton of milk from the top shelf and pretended to study the label, his heart pounding. He could almost feel the weight of their doubt pressing against his back. He thought of the day his mother had taught him to stand tall, to look people in the eye. He set the milk on the counter and offered a small smile to Mr. Adams, who ran the place. "Morning," Marcus said, voice calm. Mr. Adams didn't return the smile. "Morning, son," he said, scanning the carton with practiced eye. "You all right?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Word is you chasing after some billionaire's crumbs." Marcus cleared his throat. "It's not that. It's an opportunity to help people here, to give back." He lifted his chin, meeting Mr. Adams's gaze. He remembered the countless mornings the old man had offered him donuts and coffee when he'd been too tired to think straight. He owed this place loyalty. Mr. Adams set down the carton and offered a cigarette. Marcus shook his head. "Thanks, but no." The old man shrugged and returned to the register, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Outside, a car roared past, honking at a dog darting into the street. The moment cracked open like a fragile shell, and Marcus felt the full weight of his choice. He had stepped off the familiar ground of gutters and stoops and into a world where money talked louder than loyalty. Later that afternoon, Elijah's assistant called to confirm Marcus's start date. Marcus stared at the phone, willing himself to sound confident. He managed to say, "Yes, thank you," before hanging up. His pulse thundered in his ears. He pictured Elijah in that glass-walled office, extending his hand across the mahogany desk. Marcus wondered how he could stand toe-to-toe with men in suits who traded millions in seconds. Doubt curled around his mind like a vine, whispering that he was out of place, that he would fail. He pushed through the front door of his apartment and paused in the hallway. His neighbor, Mrs. Clark, peeked out of her door. She wore a faded bathrobe and a look of concern. "Marcus," she said quietly, "be careful with that man. Millionaires don't hand out gifts for nothing." Her eyes glistened with worry. "You remember what happened to my boy, right? He took a gig once and ended up worse off." Marcus nodded, the memory sharp and painful. Mrs. Clark's son had vanished after signing away his dream. The thought knotted his stomach. He wanted to protest, to say he knew what he was doing, but he only nodded again and retreated into his apartment. He closed the door and leaned against it, breathing deep, trying to shake the unease. That evening, he found himself wandering down to the old park bench where he had first seen Elijah stumble. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. He sat, the wooden slats rough under his palm, and closed his eyes. He thought of his mother's laughter when she caught him dancing in the kitchen, how she had believed in small miracles. He thought of the harsh words from neighbors who couldn't see beyond suspicion. He thought of Elijah's quiet smile when he offered the internship, as if welcoming him into something bigger than a paycheck. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He wasn't sure if he was scared for himself or for the neighborhood he loved. He whispered into the dusk, "I'm not doing this for me alone." He imagined the children he had grown up with, the families struggling to keep their homes, the old market teetering on the brink of foreclosure. He pictured their faces when they saw someone from their own street step into a world of power and influence. That night, sleep came in fits and starts. Dreams of glass towers swallowed by floodwaters chased him through echoing hallways. He woke to a text from Elijah. "See you at 9. A reminder and a challenge all in one line. Marcus swallowed hard, feeling the pulse of possibility mix with his fears. He realized that this path would test him in ways he had never known. It would not be enough to carry water. He would have to carry belief both in himself and in his people. When dawn broke, he rose with a resolve he had never felt before. He dressed in a crisp shirt and jeans, combed his hair until it caught the light, and tucked Elijah's letter into his pocket. He stepped outside into the crisp air, straightening his shoulders. The streets were stirring. Vendors setting up tables, the hum of car engines, the distant laughter of children heading to school. Marcus inhaled deeply, tasting the day's promise and its perils. He thought of the doubts that had shadowed him, neighbors who couldn't see beyond suspicion, warnings of hidden traps, his own fear of failure. He folded those doubts away like turning a page in a worn book. He would carry them with him, but they would not lead him. Instead, he would let Elijah's faith guide him, a faith born from one small act of kindness. As he approached the Washington Community Fund building, he felt every eye on him again. But this time, he held his head high. He knew the road ahead would be rocky, filled with whispered doubts and hidden obstacles. Yet beneath all that, he felt a spark of something stronger than fear, hope. And with hope in his chest, Marcus Brooks stepped through the glass doors, ready to plant the seeds of change, even as the seeds of doubt still clung to his heart. Chapter 3. Echoes of Generosity. Marcus stepped into the Washington Community Fund lobby that morning and felt as if he had walked into another world. The polished marble floor reflected the soft glow of recessed lights, and framed photographs of smiling children lined the walls. He carried the internship folder in his hands like a sacred text. The receptionist offered him a warm nod, and for a moment Marcus wondered if he had somehow stumbled into a dream. Elijah Washington appeared at the glass-walled conference room door, his tailored suit now replaced by a navy sweater over a crisp white shirt. He motioned Marcus inside without a word. The room was filled with young people gathered around a long table, their voices low but excited. On the table lay stacks of project proposals, each one promising to uplift schools, parks, and struggling families across Michigan. Elijah introduced Marcus to the team. There was Tasha, a former teacher turned program director whose calm eyes seemed to see right through him, and Darnell, a community organizer with quick hands and sharper wit. Marcus shook their hands, his heart racing as he tried to keep his voice steady. He noticed how Tasha studied him with gentle curiosity, as if she wanted to know whether he truly belonged here. They began with a tour of the facility. Marcus marveled at the computer lab where local teens learned coding, the library nook where volunteers tutored children after school, and the art studio where canvases captured the neighborhood's raw beauty. Everywhere he looked, he saw echoes of the single gesture that had brought him here. A ripple of generosity spreading out into lives he could barely imagine touching. At noon, Elijah invited the interns to join him for lunch in the rooftop garden. The Detroit skyline shimmered in the distance, the Renaissance Center's towers reaching toward the sky like gleaming sentinels. Marcus carried his lunch tray past rows of potted herbs and flowers, feeling the breeze ruffle his hair. He sat next to Tasha, whose warm laugh reminded him of Sunday dinners at his grandmother's house in Flint. Over turkey sandwiches and fresh fruit, Elijah spoke softly about his own beginnings. He told them about the day he had collapsed outside that corner store, thanks to hunger and exhaustion, and how one small cup of water had turned into a lifelong mission. Marcus watched Elijah's hands as he spoke, long fingers tapping the table, betraying a restless energy. There was something vulnerable in his confession, a crack in the armor of the billionaire persona that Marcus had imagined. As Elijah finished, the group fell silent. The air tasted of possibility and confession. Marcus felt a tug in his chest, a longing to share his own story, but fear held his tongue. What could he say that hadn't already been said? He had offered water to a stranger and now sat among city changers discussing grants worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The afternoon was spent reviewing proposals. Marcus read through applications from neighborhood leaders who wanted to start community gardens, after-school mentors, and job training programs for returning citizens. Each proposal carried the weight of dreams and desperation. He felt the thrill of potential but wondered how he would choose between them. He felt Elijah's gaze on him, a quiet confidence that he could do this work, that he could sift through hopes and hardships to find the projects that would transform lives. Late in the day, a sudden knock interrupted the meeting. A slender woman in a crisp suit entered, her expression tight. She introduced herself as Marisol Patterson, a major donor with a reputation for tough questions and tougher expectations. Marcus felt a chill as she inspected the room, her eyes briefly meeting his. He realized in that moment that this world was governed by more than gratitude. It was also ruled by power, politics, and the pressure to perform. Marisol asked pointed questions about the fund's transparency and accountability. Tasha answered with measured confidence, citing reports and metrics. Darnell spoke passionately about community impact. Marcus wanted to speak to defend the heartfelt proposals he had read, but no words came. He sat mute, feeling the eyes of the interns on him, weighing his reaction. When the meeting ended, Marisol nodded curtly and left, leaving behind a tension that settled over the group like a heavy curtain. Elijah let out a slow breath and looked at Marcus. "They're always watching," he said quietly. "But it's our job to keep faith with the people who need us most." Marcus nodded, his chest tight with renewed purpose. He realized that generosity did not exist in a vacuum. It entailed responsibility, scrutiny, and the courage to stand firm when doubts threatened to overwhelm. He thought of his mother's words about kindness and resilience, and of the market in his neighborhood teetering on the brink. He felt a fierce determination ignite in his veins. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Marcus stayed behind to help clear the table. He gathered empty plates and tossed discarded napkins into the bin. Tasha joined him, her voice soft. "You did good today," she said. Marcus felt warmth spread through him at her praise, as if the day's trials had been worth every moment. He managed a small smile and shrugged. "It's just the beginning," he replied. He folded his shoulders back and lifted his chin. He was no longer the cleaning man who offered water. He was Marcus Brooks, intern and advocate, tasked with deciding which seeds of generosity would bloom next. He felt the weight and promise of that role settle on his heart like a mantle. Outside, the city lights began to wink on, each window a story waiting to be heard. Marcus walked through the lobby toward the exit, the echoes of generosity still humming in his mind. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Funders to please, communities to impress, and the nagging doubt that he might fail. But he also carried Elijah's faith and his own mother's memory. Two guiding lights that would keep him moving forward. As he reached the glass doors, he paused and looked back at the silent conference room. The tables, now empty, held the ghosts of proposals and the promise of change. Marcus felt a shiver of excitement and fear. He stepped into the night, ready to face whatever questions and echoes tomorrow would bring. Chapter 4. The Rising Storm. Marcus arrived early at the community center that morning, the sky low and heavy with gray clouds that promised a late summer downpour. He carried a sheaf of notes in his hand and felt the familiar flutter of nerves in his chest. The center's broad windows looked out on Elmwood Market, That aging strip of shops where neighbors bought groceries and children chased each other between fruit stands. It was the heart of his block, and now it stood on the brink of disappearance. He remembered the first time he'd seen the "For Sale" sign in front of Mrs. Jenkins's store, the same stoop where he had shared a shake with his mother decades ago. He had paused on his way to meet Elijah, heart sudden as if it had caught on fire. Now the sign was larger, menacing in white letters, and below it someone had taped a printed flyer. Eagle's corporate development intends to buy this block, change or move on. The paper fluttered in the breeze like a warning. Inside the center, Elijah was already in conversation with Darnell and Tasha. Malcolm Carter, the suit-clad representative of Eagle's corporate, stood at the edge of the lobby, his posture confident and his smile practiced. Carter's dark suit jacket was open at the collar, revealing an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. Marcus watched him, noting how the man's gaze swept the room, as if measuring each person's worth like inventory. When Elijah caught sight of Marcus, he beckoned him over. Darnell handed Marcus an envelope thick with documents, contracts, maps, appraisal reports. The words "market redevelopment" and "luxury condominiums" appeared in crisp type. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. These plans would erase not only the shops he loved, but the memories etched into their walls and floors. Elijah laid a hand on his shoulder. "We called a town hall tonight. I want you to lead it." His voice was calm but urgent. Marcus stared at the papers. "Me?" he whispered. "People look up to you. You know this neighborhood better than anyone." Marcus swallowed, realizing that this was the moment he'd been preparing for. He drew a deep breath and nodded. In his mind, he saw the faces of every neighbor. Mrs. Clark clutching her cane as she shuffled to the market, young Darrell Carter playing tag between the stalls, Mr. Adams lining up the bread loaves at dawn. Those faces filled him with purpose. That afternoon, Marcus went door to door, inviting neighbors to the meeting in the recreation room of the community center. Some answered with weary smiles. Others slammed the door before he finished speaking. He heard whispers of hope and threats of defeat. In one house, a woman with silver-streaked braids pressed a small coffee cup into his hand and said simply, "Tell him we're with you." Another neighbor blamed Marcus for stirring trouble, muttering that he was chasing that billionaire's shadow. As dusk settled, the room filled with restless energy. Folding chairs scraped the hardwood floor, and the buzz of conversation rose like a gathering storm. Marcus stood at the front, his palms damp against the lectern. The harsh overhead light cast long shadows, turning the familiar faces into silhouettes of anxiety and resolve. He began by laying out the facts. The market's long history as a community hub, Eagle's corporates plan to replace it with glass towers, and the risk of pricing families out of their homes. His voice trembled at first, but he steeled himself, remembering his mother's mantra, "Speak true and people will listen." He shared Elijah's vision for preserving the market and reinvesting in local businesses, offering a blueprint for renovation instead of demolition. Malcolm Carter rose then, smooth and confident. He painted a picture of economic growth, luxury apartments, upscale shops, and rising property values. He spoke of progress and modernization, words that tasted bitter in the crowded room. Some listeners leaned forward, tempted by the promise of new jobs and better amenities. Others stiffened, clenching their fists. Marcus watched as a young mother gripped her child's hand, uncertainty clouding her eyes. He saw the elderly man in the back row, arms folded so tightly his knuckles turned white. He realized that every argument, every promise was more than words on paper. It was a threat to the shared history of their block. He took a breath. Change can mean opportunity, but not if it erases us, he said, voice stronger now. This market has fed our families, given our children part-time jobs, and been the backdrop of weddings, baptisms, funerals. It's more than asphalt and timber. It's our story. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Marcus felt the room lean in with him. Then a smell of rain drifted through the open door. A single drop of water hit the floor, echoing like a verdict. In that moment, the crowd seemed to unite, rallying behind his words. A chorus of murmurs rose. We can fight this. We've got to stand together. Tell me when to sign. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes, not of fear, but of fierce hope. Elijah stepped forward and laid a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You did it, he whispered. The applause that followed rolled through the room like thunder. Marcus realized that the rising storm outside had become a storm of solidarity inside, one born not of destruction but of resolve. As the meeting ended, neighbors formed clusters, exchanging phone numbers and plans to attend the city council hearing. Marcus watched them, the weight of responsibility still heavy on his shoulders but lightened by their trust. Outside, the thunder rumbled and rain began in earnest. He stepped into the downpour, feeling each drop as a challenge and a blessing. The storm had come, but so had the strength of a community refusing to be washed away. Chapter 5. Mirror of Fate. Marcus felt the weight of the night's rain still clinging to his coat as he crossed Elmwood Market's slick pavement the next morning. Steam rose from cracked grates, twisting through the dawn light like ghosts of the past. He clutched a worn leather journal. Elijah's gift to him after the town hall, its pages filled with stories of lives changed and tortuous lessons learned. Marcus remembered how Elijah had leaned close, sharing the anecdote of the day when a stray loaf of bread saved his life. Now it was Marcus's turn to face his own reflection. Inside the community center, Marcus found Elijah already at work. The billionaire stood by the window, gazing out at the block they had vowed to protect. His broad shoulders were squared against the glass, and his expression was far away, as though he were replaying a memory only he could see. Marcus cleared his throat and joined him, feeling suddenly small in the hush of those high ceilings. There was a woman, Elijah began without turning. His voice was soft, as if he were confessing a secret to the building itself. She ran the corner bakery, Mrs. Whitaker. One morning I woke shivering from the curb's cold. She saw me and wrapped her apron around my shoulders. She offered me a piece of that day's first loaf. I ate it like a man starved for hope. He paused and looked at Marcus, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and a haunting sorrow. I never saw her again, but that single act set me on this path. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar tug in his chest. He thought of his mother's laughter and the warm kitchen where she had taught him empathy. He thought of his own small act, the water he had handed Elijah, and how it had rippled into this grand mission. He realized that generosity carried a mirror, the giver and the receiver forever bound by the moment of grace. That afternoon, Marcus walked the market street with renewed purpose. He stopped at Mrs. Jenkins's store and offered to help her stock shelves. She accepted with a weary smile but did not speak of the fight ahead. As he lifted crates of canned goods, he noticed the faded photograph on her counter. A younger Mrs. Jenkins standing beside a black and white bakery truck, her arms wrapped around a stranger. Marcus's heart leapt. He asked quietly, "Who's that with you?" Mrs. Jenkins paused, eyes distant, as if peering through time. "That's my sister. She vanished years ago, leaving me everything. I never knew why." She turned the photo to dust, then set it aside. Marcus felt a shiver. The missing sister, the vanished baker, had she been Elijah's secret benefactor? Intrigue settled around him like evening fog. He tucked the question away, deciding to uncover the truth later. For now, he had a community fund to manage. Back at the center, Tasha awaited him with a stack of files detailing rescue initiatives for struggling families. As they talked, Tasha's words lingered. "This neighborhood's history is our compass." Marcus realized that beneath the struggle for the market lay deeper mysteries, old loyalties, hidden debts, and long-buried kindnesses. Later that week, Elijah invited Marcus to dinner at his Detroit townhouse. The walls were lined with art celebrating African-American heritage, paintings of jazz musicians, sculptures of proud ancestors. Over bowls of gumbo and sweet cornbread, Elijah spoke of his father's departure when he was a child, leaving him with a mother who worked 3 jobs. "I learned to survive on scraps of hope," he said, running a fork through the stew. "But it was Mrs. Whitaker's bread that taught me to live with purpose." Marcus listened, feeling a kinship with this man who had risen from hunger to power yet remained tethered to humble roots. As Elijah excused himself, Marcus stood before a portrait of a woman in a bakery uniform. She wore a kind smile, her eyes full of warmth. He whispered, "Were you Mrs. Whitaker?" At that moment, footsteps approached. Elijah returned and placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I've been meaning to tell you," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Whitaker was my aunt. She disappeared the night she sheltered me. I searched for years but never found her." Marcus's breath caught. The woman in the photo was the same aunt who had saved Elijah. Tasha's sister, Mrs. Jenkins's sibling, was the aunt whose bread had nourished Elijah's spirit. Fate had woven their lives together long before Marcus arrived. The revelation struck Marcus like a bolt of lightning. He understood that every act of kindness echoed through generations, binding strangers into family. His own mother's lessons, Elijah's aunt's compassion, Mrs. Jenkins's quiet sorrow, all were threads in a tapestry of shared humanity. He swallowed hard, tears blurring his vision of the painting. Elijah gently squeezed his shoulder. "Your water saved me," he said softly. "Now you save this community." Marcus bowed his head, overwhelmed by the weight of both gratitude and responsibility. He realized that their partnership was deeper than grants and meetings. It was a legacy of generosity spanning decades. The next day, Marcus returned to the market with renewed fire. He organized a harvest festival to celebrate the block's history and raise funds for Mrs. Jenkins's store renovation. He enlisted local musicians, food vendors, and storytellers to share memories of Elmwood Market. Banners fluttered in the breeze. "Honoring our roots, building our future." As the sun set on festival night, the street pulsed with laughter and music, the air rich with the scent of gumbo and sweet potato pies. At the center of the square, Marcus watched Mrs. Jenkins stand beside a replica of her sister's bakery truck. She clutched the old photograph in one hand, tears of pride and grief mingling on her cheeks. She stepped forward and addressed the crowd, her voice strong despite the tremble. She spoke of loss and love, of the power of a single act to shape destinies. When she finished, Elijah joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder in solidarity. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus felt his chest expand with a truth he could no longer deny. Generosity was both mirror and window, reflecting the best of who they were and revealing the potential for who they could become. He knew the road ahead would still twist with challenges, rival developers, old wounds, and fresh doubts, but in that moment he held fast to the memory of water and bread, of hidden connections and revealed truths. As the festival lights dimmed and the last straggler left the square, Marcus lingered beneath the glow of the borrowed lanterns. He opened his journal and wrote a single line, "One small act can echo through eternity." He closed the book and looked up at the night sky, the stars twinkling like distant promises. He felt his mother's voice whisper in the hush. "What you give will come back 100-fold," and as the lanterns flickered out, he believed it with every fiber of his being. Chapter 6. The Reveal. The day of the market's auction dawned cool and bright, sunlight dancing on the mirrors of nearby high-rises as if celebrating a secret. Marcus arrived at the City Hall auditorium with his heart pounding so loud he could almost hear it echo along with the chatter of investors and community members alike. Rows of folding chairs were already filled with sharp suits and polished shoes, their owners leafing through glossy brochures that promised profit margins and luxury living. At the back, a handful of familiar faces from Elmwood Market clustered together. The Jenkins family, Mr. Adams, even Mrs. Clark, her silver hair tucked beneath a neat scarf. Each held a small paper ticket, hope and fear mixing in their eyes like storm clouds. Elijah Washington slipped into the front row beside Marcus, his usual calm smile in place, but his eyes bright with anticipation. He wore a charcoal blazer over a simple white tee, the contrast a quiet reminder that power could wear humility like a shield. Marcus leaned in, voice barely more than a breath. "Whatever happens, we did what we could." Elijah clasped his hand briefly, the contact steadying Marcus in a way that made his pulse slow. The auctioneer's gavel struck the podium, and the room fell silent. He introduced Eagle's corporate first, their representative Malcolm Carter stepping forward to bid on the lot. Carter's confident voice rolled over the crowd. 1,500,000. Gasps rippled through the market supporters. At that moment, a hush fell over Marcus. He could almost taste the bitterness of defeat. Elijah rose, his posture certain as he raised a single finger. 1,700,000. The hall shifted, the balance tipping as murmurs swelled into a tide. Carter's lips pressed into a thin line, but he nodded and bid again, each number climbing like a crescendo of inevitability. Marcus watched Elijah, wondering how one man could summon such quiet force, outmaneuvering corporate muscle with nothing more than conviction and deep pockets. He felt a swell of pride, but beneath it lay a flicker of unease. Had they risked too much? When the gavel finally fell, declaring Elijah the highest bidder, applause burst like fireworks. It echoed off the marble walls, shaking loose years of doubt and despair from the market's rafters. Marcus felt tears blur his vision as Mrs. Jenkins pressed her head to his shoulder, whispering gratitude he could barely hear. Mr. Adams shook his hand so hard Marcus thought his fingers might crack. The room's energy pulsed, alive with the promise of renewed life for Elmwood. But as the crowd dispersed, a hush fell between Marcus and Elijah. The billionaire placed an arm around him and guided him toward a narrow hallway lit by industrial sconces. The walls here were bare, the air cooler, and Marcus sensed a shift as though they walked into a place where secrets lay waiting. Elijah's voice dropped. "There's something I need you to know." He paused at a steel door and pushed it open. Inside was a small office, its walls lined with family photographs, snapshots of a younger Elijah standing beside a woman whose smile Marcus recognized at once as the baker from the portrait in Elijah's townhouse. But here she wore a different name badge, Marisol Johnson, and beside her photograph was another, a younger man with Malcolm Carter's unmistakable features. Marcus's breath hitched. "She was my sister," Elijah said quietly. "Marisol was her name before she disappeared. Malcolm is her son." The revelation struck Marcus like a bolt. The man who had come to buy them out was the long-lost nephew of the woman whose bread had saved Elijah's life. A twist so tangled it made his head spin. He thought of the confrontations, the town hall, the boardroom battles, not as separate events but as threads woven by a family story no one had suspected. Malcolm Carter, the corporate shark, had inherited both ambition and a hidden legacy. He had bid against his uncle's fund, pitting family against community in pursuit of profit. Marcus felt a surge of anger, confusion, and sorrow. He looked at Elijah, whose eyes glistened with regret. "I didn't know until now," Elijah said. "She left to protect me. She feared that my place in that bakery would make me a target. She changed her name and built a life here. But she never stopped watching over me." Elijah ran a hand through his hair. "Malcolm found out about me last year. He saw an opportunity to leverage our shared blood for his own gain." Silence thickened the room. Marcus reflected on every handshake with Malcolm, every pleasant smile that masked deeper motives. He realized how close they had come to losing the market twice, first to doubt, and then to an undisclosed family feud. The lines between friend and foe blurred in that moment, and Marcus felt the weight of responsibility shift. This was no longer just a battle to save a market, it was a reckoning with hidden debts, forgotten debts of gratitude and betrayal. Elijah placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We still have work to do," he said. "This reveal changes everything, but it doesn't have to destroy us." Marcus met his gaze and nodded, feeling a fierce resolve ignite within him. He knew now that generosity and loyalty could be as fragile as glass, vulnerable to secrets kept in shadows. But they could also be reforged with honesty and courage. They left the office and returned to the light where neighbors gathered to celebrate. Marcus stepped onto the stage once more, clearing his throat. He spoke of unity and forgiveness, of honoring the past while building a future that held room for every hidden story. The crowd listened, their faces open and curious. He saw Malcolm Carter in the back row, his expression unreadable, but his eyes no longer filled with triumph. He watched Elijah standing beside Mrs. Jenkins, their shared lineage binding them in quiet reconciliation. As the festivities resumed, Marcus felt the market breathe around him, its stalls, its laughter, its echoes of yesterday and promises of tomorrow. He understood that the most powerful reveals were those that brought people together, that turned betrayals into turns toward understanding. And as Detroit's afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of Elmwood Market, Marcus Brooks realized that truth, once spoken, had the power to heal even the deepest rifts and plant seeds of hope in the richest soil. Chapter 7: The Turning Tide. Marcus arrived at the renovated Elmwood Market early on a brisk autumn morning, the air crisp with promise and the scent of roasting coffee beans drifting from the new cafe corner. The stalls now gleamed with fresh paint, and colorful banners fluttered overhead declaring Brooks Community Fund presence in bold letters. He paused at the entrance, taking in the sight of neatly arranged produce, artisan crafts, and a small stage set for local musicians. It felt like stepping into a dream he'd almost given up on. He walked slowly down the main aisle, nodding at faces he had come to care for. The Jenkins family unpacking handmade soaps, Mr. Adams arranging loaves of whole-grain bread, and young Darrell Carter stacking jars of honey. Their smiles were genuine, not born of relief alone but of pride. Each person embodied the turning tide they had fought so fiercely to bring. Marcus felt a lump in his throat, gratitude and wonder mingling as he remembered the water bottle he had offered and the gavel's thunderous fall months before. At the center of the market square, a new bronze plaque glinted in the late sun. It read, "In gratitude to Marcus Brooks and all who believe that a single act of kindness can rebuild a community." Marcus knelt to brush a fallen leaf aside, fingers trembling as he read the words etched in stone. He thought of his mother's gentle voice, urging him to give without expecting return, and of Elijah's unwavering faith in that simple act. The plaque was more than recognition. It was a symbol of what people could achieve when generosity and determination joined hands. A soft melody drifted from the stage where Tasha and Darnell had taken turns introducing workshops and mentors. Marcus stepped up to mic check, the microphone cool beneath his palm. Behind him the crowd gathered, children perched on hay bales, neighbors leaning on market stalls, and city officials seated under a white canopy. Their faces shone with anticipation. Elijah stood at the edge of the stage, his tall figure framed by the rising steam of a brewing urn. When Marcus looked at him, Elijah gave a slight nod, the kind that said, "We did it together." Marcus cleared his throat, the words flowing as if carried by the wind. He spoke of the power of one drop of water that had sparked a movement, of the hidden debts of kindness repaid in full, and of the community's promise to care for one another. He shared stories of families who had found new jobs, of youth who learned to code in the refurbished lab, and of the baker who reopened her sister's old recipes in the cafe kitchen. Each anecdote felt like a piece of his own heart laid bare before them. When he finished, applause rolled across the square like gentle waves lapping ashore, and Marcus felt tears fill his eyes once more. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, festival lights twinkled on and the market took on a golden glow. Music filled the air, soulful guitar riffs and smooth bass lines weaving through laughter and conversation. Children chased each other around the fountain that had been restored, water dancing in arcs that glittered like crystals. Marcus wandered through the stalls, accepting handshakes and hugs, but each encounter left him wondering about the deeper currents beneath the victory. He found Elijah standing near the fountain, watching the water play in the final light of day. The billionaire's face was contemplative, as though he were reading the reflections on the water's surface. Marcus joined him in silence, listening to the splash of droplets against stone. "I never thought we'd see this day," Marcus said softly. "You took a stranger's act of kindness and turned it into something extraordinary." Elijah smiled, eyes tracing the fountain's curves. "You did the real work," he replied. "I provided resources, but you provided the heart." He paused and looked at Marcus, his gaze steady. "This turning tide, it doesn't end here. It's a promise to keep faith with every person who ever gave or received kindness on this block." Marcus felt the weight of those words settle in his chest, a mix of pride and urgency. He remembered the hidden story of family that had nearly torn them apart, the revelation of Elijah's aunt and her son Malcolm Carter, now reconciled beneath the market's open sky. He recognized that their journey was not just about saving buildings, but about healing wounds and forging new bonds. As dusk settled into night, the market's lights reflected in Marcus's eyes like distant stars. He watched neighbors dance to a soulful tune, their steps unhurried and joyful. He thought of Mrs. Jenkins offering her first taste of honey from her own hive to a curious passerby, and of Mr. Adams teaching a young boy to knead dough. Everywhere he looked, generosity flowed in every conversation, every shared meal, every seed planted. Marcus closed his eyes and inhaled the crisp air, tasting hope as he might have savored that first bottle of water months ago. He felt his mother's presence in the laughter of children, Elijah's guiding hand in the market's renewal, and his own resolve solidifying like the plaque underfoot. In that moment he understood that the turning tide was not a final victory, but the beginning of a steadfast current that would carry them forward. He opened his eyes and faced the crowd once more, raising his hands in a gesture of unity. The market hushed, and for a heartbeat everyone shared the same breath. Then the music swelled and the dancing resumed, glowing lanterns bobbing in the warm night air. Marcus stepped back, content to blend into the scene, heart full of gratitude and anticipation for the chapters yet to come. Chapter 8. Homegrown Harvest. Marcus stood in the dawn light as the first vendors arrived at Elmwood Market, their breath rising in gentle clouds against the crisp October air. The stalls had settled into a steady rhythm, fresh produce stacked in neat pyramids, hand-woven baskets brimming with autumn apples, and jars of honey catching the weak sun like amber beacons. He inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of fallen leaves mingled with roasting coffee and the faint trace of wood smoke from nearby chimeneas. This place had become more than a marketplace. It was the living heartbeat of a community reborn. He wandered between stalls, offering nods and quiet hellos. Mrs. Jenkins adjusted her knit shawl as she arranged loaves of her sister's famous sourdough, now baked fresh in the cafe kitchen. Mr. Adams, his white apron spotless, handed a small loaf to a little girl who tasted it with wide-eyed delight. Marcus paused at the edge of a mural painted on the brick wall beside the market entrance. It depicted a single drop of water falling into cracked earth, and from that drop a tree had grown, its branches sheltering people of all ages. He had taught the artist how to sketch the image. Now it served as a reminder that small acts could yield mighty forests. As the morning trade began, Marcus noticed a new face, a tall man with silver-gray dreadlocks tied back in a loose knot, setting up a stand of handmade journals and leather goods. He moved with a quiet confidence, his dark eyes scanning the market as if committing every detail to memory. Marcus approached him with a friendly smile. The man introduced himself as Elijah Brooks, though not the same Elijah Washington who had sparked this transformation. This Elijah was a filmmaker from Atlanta who had come to document the market's story. His presence carried a curious energy. Camera gear slung over his shoulder, notebooks tucked under one arm, and a steady gaze that seemed to see into Marcus's soul. They talked briefly about schedules and interviews, but Marcus felt a flutter of nerves at telling his story one more time. He worried it might sound too familiar, that listeners would grow tired of the tale of a simple act of kindness. Elijah Brooks caught his hesitation and offered a reassuring nod. "Stories aren't tired when they're true," he said softly. "And when you share your truth, you do more than remember. You inspire." Marcus felt the weight of those words settle like a warm blanket around his shoulders. He realized that the market's story was still unfolding, that each day brought new chapters. He thought of the children learning to code in the refurbished lab, of the returning citizen who had opened a barber shop down the block, and of the young couple who had moved into a renovated loft above the market. Each person carried a seed of hope, and now a filmmaker's lens would capture their quiet triumphs and lingering anxieties. As autumn deepened, Marcus organized a harvest ceremony at the central fountain, the same one Liverpool art students had restored with colorful mosaics. Neighbors brought vegetables from their garden, squash, kale, heirloom tomatoes, and offered them in a symbolic basket to the market's spirit. Landon Carter, Daryl's older cousin, stood at the edge of the circle and recited a poem he had written about memory and renewal. His voice wove through the crisp air, touching hearts with lines about the rain that once washed away their past and the sunshine that had since nurtured their growth. Marcus watched the faces around him, weathered hands lifted toward the basket, tears glistening in the corners of eyes and smiles that trembled with gratitude. He felt his own tears fall, not of sorrow but of profound wonder. This harvest was more than crops. It was the harvest of faith, courage, and shared purpose. He had walked this path from the moment he handed a stranger a bottle of water, never knowing that small gesture would yield such abundance. Later that afternoon, as the market quieted, Marcus sat on the edge of the fountain and opened the leather journal Elijah Brooks had given him. Its pages were blank, waiting for his reflections. He tucked a pen behind his ear and began to write. "Today I saw children chase each other through stalls without fear. I saw neighbors gather to celebrate what we built together. I felt our story carry forward into hands I may never hold." He paused, looking up at the turning leaves drifting onto the mosaic tiles. He realized that this was his true harvest. The seeds of hope he had planted were thriving in every laughter, every handshake, every shared meal. A soft splash drew his gaze to a young boy offering a paper cup of water to an elderly man shuffling by. The man accepted it with a grateful nod, and the boy's proud smile reminded Marcus of the day he had carried water for Elijah Washington. He closed his journal, heart full. The cycle had come full circle. One drop of kindness had blossomed into a forest, and now new drops continued the flow, As dusk fell, the market's lanterns glowed like distant stars. Marcus rose and walked slowly toward the mural of the tree. He laid his hand on the painted trunk, feeling the rough texture of brick beneath his fingers. He whispered a promise: to nurture this place, to honor every act of care, and to remember that true wealth lay not in bank accounts but in open hearts. The day ended as it had begun, in quiet reflection and shared presence. Marcus left the market under a sky ablaze with copper and violet, the crisp air carrying the scent of dying leaves and possibility. He knew that challenges would come again, new developers, fresh doubts, the danger of complacency. But he also knew that the community had tasted its own strength and would stand firm. Walking home, he passed the corner store where the story began. He paused and pressed his palm against the cool glass of the door, remembering how he had once offered a single bottle of water. He smiled, knowing that moment had rippled outward and taken root in thousands of acts of kindness. He felt his mother's presence there beside him, her gentle voice urging him onward, and he whispered, "Thank you." Then he stepped away, carrying the homegrown harvest of hope in his heart and ready to plant the next season's seeds.